Hey everyone, and welcome back to English BookCast. You know the drill by now. If you're enjoying these deep dives, hit that subscribe button and help us grow this awesome community of curious minds. And hey, spread the word. Share this with anyone you think would be into it.
Yeah, the more, the merrier, right? We love exploring these fascinating ideas and getting everyone's perspectives.
Absolutely. So let's dive right in, shall we? Today, we're tackling a real head-scratcher, a book that's both brilliant and super controversial. Worlds in Collision by Immanuel Velikovsky.
Published back in 1950, this book really shook things up.
It did. Velikovsky basically said, hey, what if our solar system wasn't always so chill? What if, in the relatively recent past, the planets were like bumper cars, causing massive global catastrophes on Earth?
Yeah, definitely not your typical view of history, or space for that matter.
Nope. And the scientific community, well, let's just say they weren't exactly thrilled with Velikovsky's ideas.
They basically said, hold on, that's not how physics works.
Right. But here's the thing. Some of Velikovsky's predictions, even though they sounded crazy at the time, have actually been confirmed by later discoveries. It's pretty wild.
That's what makes this book so interesting. It challenges us to rethink what we think we know about the past. And to be fair to Velikovsky, he didn't just pull these ideas out of thin air. He drew on a huge range of evidence.
Seriously, we're talking everything from ancient texts and mythology to archaeology, geology, and even paleontology. Our mission today is to unpack all of that. We'll be exploring the core arguments of worlds in collision and the diverse sources Velikovsky used to support his claims. And you, our awesome listeners, you're probably here because you're hungry for knowledge but also value your time. You want the aha moments without getting bogged down in a ton of detail.
We hear you. We'll do our best to deliver those key insights in a way that's both informative and entertaining.
Okay, so let's start with the central idea of Velikovsky's book. It's pretty radical stuff. He argues that massive cosmic upheavals didn't just happen billions of years ago, but within recorded human history.
And we're not talking about minor events here. These were catastrophic, earth-shattering events that reshaped our planet.
Exactly. And the first question that pops up is, if these events were so huge, so mind-blowingly destructive, why don't we remember them? Why aren't they part of our common knowledge? Velikovsky's answer: collective amnesia.
Basically, the trauma was so overwhelming that humanity as a whole kind of buried the memory of it deep down. It's like a global-scale repression of traumatic memories.
Kind of like how individuals can repress painful memories to cope, right?
Yeah.
Velikovsky says maybe entire societies did the same. It's a fascinating and maybe a little disturbing concept.
Totally. And Velikovsky argues that these repressed memories surface in our myths and legends. The stories we've always told ourselves, often dismissed as just fantasy, might actually hold clues to real cosmic trauma.
Okay, so how does Velikovsky actually back up this wild theory? Where's the evidence?
He brings in evidence from a crazy, diverse range of sources: ancient texts, classical literature like the Iliad and Odyssey, the epics of different cultures, religious texts from all over the world, the Bible, the Vedas, you name it.
That's pretty diverse.
And he doesn't stop there. He looks at folklore from indigenous cultures, astronomical inscriptions, archaeological findings that show sudden destruction, and even geological and paleontological data.
He's really pulling from all over the place. He's basically saying, look, this isn't just one culture's isolated story. There's a global pattern here, a recurring theme of catastrophe.
Right. And he argues that this shared memory of disaster points to real events.
Makes sense. So tell me more about these recurring themes. What exactly was Velikovsky seeing across these different sources?
Well, one big theme is the idea of world cycles and destruction. A lot of ancient cultures believe that the world we live in is just one in a long line of worlds, each ending in some kind of cataclysm.
It's almost like the universe hits the reset button every so often.
Exactly. For example, Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, believed that the cosmos was destroyed by fire every 10,800 years, followed by renewal.
That's a pretty specific number.
It is, right. And it's not just him. Other Greek thinkers like Aristarchus of Samos and the Stoics also believed in cyclical destruction and rebirth, either by fire or floods.
So it was a pretty widespread idea in ancient Greece.
Yeah, and it pops up in other cultures too. In Hindu cosmology, they have the concept of kalpas or yugas, which are vast cycles of time, each ending in a major catastrophe. Some Hindu texts describe these destructions happening by fire, floods, or even hurricanes.
Wow, so there are some parallels with the Greek ideas.
Definitely. And it doesn't stop there. Mexican codices and Indian accounts talk about past catastrophes that wiped out humanity. The Buddhist discourse on the seven suns hints at multiple epochs of destruction and renewal. Even the Sibylline books, which are collections of prophecies, mention ages of destruction followed by regeneration. And it's not just big civilizations with written records either. The Aborigines of British North Borneo, for example, have this story about the sky falling down.
That's a pretty intense image. It's like a universal fear, right? The idea of the sky, something we perceive as constant and stable, suddenly collapsing.
Absolutely. And it really speaks to the kind of cosmic scale of the events that Velikovsky is talking about.
Okay, so there's this global theme of catastrophe and cyclical destruction.
Mhm.
But let's be real, one of the biggest challenges for a lot of people is wrapping their heads around the sheer scale of what Velikovsky is suggesting. I mean, the idea of Earth's rotation or its axis shifting dramatically, that seems almost impossible without some crazy huge event, some kind of massive celestial impact.
Yeah, it's definitely a valid point. Velikovsky acknowledges that. He knows it would take an insanely powerful force to mess with Earth's rotation or axial tilt like that.
Right. Like, we've seen meteorites hit Earth, and they can cause damage for sure, but nothing on a scale that would literally change the planet's spin.
Exactly. And it's interesting to think about how even the idea of meteorites was controversial at one point. Velikovsky mentions how in 1803, the Academy of Sciences in Paris refused to believe that stones could fall from the sky. They literally said it was physically impossible.
Wow. But obviously, we know now that meteorites are a real thing.
Right. So Velikovsky's point is, just because we haven't personally witnessed an event that could knock Earth off its axis doesn't mean it couldn't have happened in the past.
So he's basically saying if little rocks can fall from space, why not something much bigger? Like, what if a giant comet slammed into Earth?
Exactly. He even mentions earlier theories about comets and catastrophes, like the work of William Whiston, who linked Noah's flood to a comet's tail, and Ignatius Donnelly, who thought cometary impacts were responsible for major geological changes.
So the idea of comets causing havoc wasn't totally new, even before Velikovsky.
Right. Velikovsky just took those ideas and really ran with them.
Okay, so we had this idea of global catastrophes and the possibility of massive celestial impacts. Now, Velikovsky really goes deep into specific events from the Bible, particularly the Exodus story. It sounds like that's where his whole theory started.
Yeah, that's right. In 1940, Velikovsky had this epiphany. He realized that the plagues of Egypt and the parting of the Red Sea, those events sounded like they could have been caused by a massive natural disaster, not just a series of miracles.
And that's what led him to his revised timeline of ancient history, right?
Exactly. He thought that if he could prove the Exodus was a real datable event tied to a major catastrophe, he could reshape our entire understanding of ancient Egypt and the ancient Hebrews. That's what he explored in his book, Ages in Chaos.
Fascinating. So our listener wants to know which specific parts of the Bible describe these catastrophic events. It sounds like the Exodus is key for Velikovsky. What exactly does he focus on within that story?
He looks at several key events. First, there's the plague of blood, where the Nile River turns to blood. Velikovsky points out that there's a very similar account in the Ipuwer Papyrus, an ancient Egyptian text. Both describe the river turning to blood and a whole lot of death and suffering.
That's a pretty wild coincidence.
It is. Then there's the plague of hail and fire. The Bible describes it as a hailstorm with fire mixed in. Again, the Ipuwer Papyrus talks about fire raining down, consuming buildings, and causing widespread destruction. Velikovsky also finds references to flaming fire and a river of fire in the Psalms and the Book of Daniel, and even mentions similar traditions in ancient Babylonian texts about a rain of fire.
So he's finding descriptions of fire raining from the sky across different cultures.
Exactly. He then looks at the plague of darkness. According to the Bible, darkness covered all of Egypt for 3 days. Rabbinical sources talk about this darkness being so thick that people couldn't even see their hands in front of their faces, and any kind of artificial light wouldn't work. The Ipuwer Papyrus again describes a similar period of unnatural darkness.
Wow. So there's this recurring theme of prolonged darkness.
Yep. And there's more. Velikovsky mentions descriptions of earthquakes during the Exodus, both in the Ipuwer Papyrus and the Psalms. Then there's the chaotic flight of the Israelites from Egypt, which he interprets as a mass exodus fleeing a major disaster.
It's starting to sound like a real apocalypse.
Right. And then there's that story in the book of Joshua where the sun and moon stand still in the sky, making the day super long. Velikovsky points out that many other cultures have similar stories of a lengthened day or the sun pausing in its course. It's a surprisingly common theme across mythology.
It really makes you wonder if there's some kernel of truth buried in those stories.
Exactly. And of course, there's the parting of the Red Sea, which Velikovsky sees as the result of a huge natural event, not just divine intervention. He mentions similar stories from cultures in South America and North America about seas being torn apart and water flooding the land. He compares the whole scene, the darkness, the hurricane force winds, the walls of water, to the Greek myth of Zeus fighting the monster Typhon.
That's a pretty epic battle.
Right. Velikovsky also tries to link the pharaoh of the Exodus to a specific account in the writings of Manetho, an ancient Egyptian historian who describes a terrible blast of God's displeasure that hit Egypt during the reign of a pharaoh named Ptolemaeus.
So according to Velikovsky, all these seemingly separate events, the plagues, the darkness, the Red Sea, the global myths, are all pieces of the same puzzle. They all point to a massive global catastrophe that happened around the time of the Exodus.
Exactly, but he goes a step further and tries to pinpoint the cosmic culprit.
That's where Venus comes in, right?
You got it. Velikovsky says that the planet Venus was once a blazing star, a comet that had a close encounter with Earth, causing all this chaos.
Wait, Venus, the planet we know today, the one named after the goddess of love, that Venus,
Yeah, that one. Sounds crazy, right?
a little bit. But how does he back up this claim?
He looks at a bunch of ancient traditions and folklore from around the world that link Venus, especially in its appearances as the morning star or evening star, to themes of disaster and destruction. For example, in Mexican mythology, Quetzalcoatl, a deity associated with Venus, is said to have attacked the sun, causing darkness and chaos.
Interesting. So he's saying these myths might be symbolic representations of a real event, a close encounter with a comet that later became Venus.
Exactly. He suggests that Venus might have had a much more chaotic orbit in the past, maybe even more like a comet, and that it had a few close calls with Earth.
And what about that 52-year cycle that was so important to the Mayans and Aztecs?
Velikovsky connects that to Venus as well. He thinks it might represent the time it took for Venus to reappear in a threatening way after its initial close encounter with Earth. He also talks about the widespread ancient worship of the morning star, which is Venus, and how it was often linked to comets and bad omens.
Wow. So Venus, the planet we see as beautiful and peaceful today, might have been a real agent of chaos in the past.
That's what Velikovsky is saying. But Venus isn't the only planet he implicates in these cosmic dramas. He brings Mars into the picture too, suggesting that it had its own close encounter with Earth a bit later.
Okay, so what's the story with Mars?
Well, Velikovsky noticed that Mars became a dreaded planet in various cultures around the 9th or 8th century BC. It became associated with war, storms, and plague.
Like the Roman god of war, Mars.
Exactly. And before that time, Mars didn't seem to have such a negative reputation. So Velikovsky suggests that a series of close encounters with Mars during that period could have caused more disturbances on Earth.
He also points to prophecies in the Old Testament from that time, right? Prophets like Amos, Isaiah, Joel, Hosea, and Micah.
Yep. They talk about the shaking of the sky and future cosmic encounters. Velikovsky thinks these prophecies might actually be based on memories of past encounters with Mars, or maybe anxieties about them happening again.
And some of those prophecies actually came true, right? Like there are accounts of the sun being darkened and strange noises being heard in the sky.
Right. Velikovsky also mentions the time of King Hezekiah in Judah, when people were really afraid of a coming catastrophe. He talks about Isaiah's Book of the Lord, a lost text that might have contained ancient astronomical records and traditions related to these prophecies.
What about the story of Sennacherib's army being destroyed? How does that fit in?
Well, there are different accounts of how Sennacherib's army was destroyed. Some say it was by fire from the sky, others say it was a plague of mice that ruined their weapons. Velikovsky links these events to a plague that also hit King Hezekiah around the same time and suggests they were all caused by a close encounter with Mars.
So plagues, fire from the sky, even mice, all potentially linked to Mars.
According to Velikovsky, yeah. He even mentions ancient Greek stories of the sun moving backward during the time of the Argive tyrants and connects it to a Mayan inscription that talks about a planet coming close to Earth.
Wow. So he's painting this picture of a really chaotic and unstable solar system in the not-so-distant past, with both Venus and Mars causing all sorts of trouble for Earth.
Exactly. And these encounters weren't just minor annoyances. Velikovsky believes they could have literally changed the Earth itself, like its rotation and the tilt of its axis.
That would have been mind-blowing, and he actually finds evidence of this in ancient traditions, right?
Yeah, he mentions Herodotus, the Greek historian, and various Egyptian texts that talk about a time when the sun rose in the west and set in the east. That's the complete opposite of what we see today. Seneca and Plato even hinted at similar things.
So people in different parts of the world were describing the sun rising and setting in the wrong direction.
Yep. And Velikovsky argues that this could only have happened if Earth's rotation reversed or its axis tilted dramatically.
That's just mind-boggling.
It is. He also brings in ancient Mexican traditions about the compass point shifting and the sun changing direction. The Jewish Midrashim talk about the sun being messed up during the Exodus, and some Psalms describe the earth being terrified and still, like it was thrown off balance.
It sounds like everything was in chaos.
Definitely. And he mentions a bunch of other sources, too. The Finnish epic Kalevala, where the sun leaves its path and new sun and moon have to be created. The Voluspa from Iceland, which describes celestial bodies going haywire. And even Aztec traditions about a sunless period and arguments among the gods about where the new sun would appear.
Like the whole cosmos was having a meltdown.
Right. And after these major upheavals, Velikovsky points out that many cultures talk about a prolonged period of darkness, a shadow of death, as the prophet Isaiah called it.
Oh, wow. So on top of everything else, the world was plunged into darkness.
Yeah. It's a recurring theme in sources from all over the world. Isaiah, ancient Japanese and Chinese records, and even traditions from Samoa and Hawaii.
It's almost like a global blackout.
Exactly. And Velikovsky suggests that this darkness would have devastated plants and messed up ecosystems, causing widespread famine.
That makes sense. And this is where he brings in the biblical story of manna, right?
Yep. Velikovsky has a really interesting theory about manna. He thinks it wasn't just a miraculous food source, but actually a kind of precipitation, maybe made of carbon and hydrogen, that rained down during this period of darkness and messed up atmosphere.
Wow. So the food that sustained the Israelites could have been a direct result of these cosmic events.
That's Velikovsky's idea. And he backs it up by comparing the biblical descriptions of manna to similar substances described in other cultures, like the ambrosia of the Greek gods. There are even traditions about rivers flowing with honey and milk during this time.
It's amazing how he weaves together all these seemingly unrelated threads. So besides the darkness and the manna, what other effects did these encounters have on Earth?
Well, earthquakes were definitely a big one. He mentions the destruction of Jericho's walls, which we know was probably caused by an earthquake. He also points to descriptions of stones falling from the sky, which could have been meteor showers or other debris from these encounters.
It sounds like there was a lot of stuff raining down from the sky.
For sure. And Velikovsky even connects the ancient practice of offering honey and flour in religious ceremonies to the manna that appeared during this time. It's like a symbolic remembrance of that event.
That's so interesting. And he also mentions the Greek myths of the great floods, like the floods of Ogyges and Deucalion.
Right. He thinks those flood myths might actually be based on the massive tsunamis and flooding that probably happened during these cosmic upheavals.
So we've got darkness, weird food, earthquakes, floods. It's a pretty apocalyptic picture.
Yeah, definitely a time of major change and upheaval. And it wasn't just the physical world that was affected. Velikovsky talks about how these events might have messed with our calendars, too.
Oh, yeah. He points out that a lot of ancient cultures used a 360-day year, which is different from our current 365-day year.
Exactly. And he says that ancient Egyptians had to add 5 extra days to their year to make things line up with the actual solar cycle. He also talks about the different lengths of months in ancient calendars and the importance of the number 60 in their systems of timekeeping.
So it sounds like there was a lot of variation in how people measured time back then.
Yeah, and Velikovsky suggests that these variations and later changes to calendars might have been attempts to adjust to actual changes in Earth's orbit and its relationship to the sun after these cosmic disruptions. He even points to those weird mistakes in ancient astronomical tablets about the length of the year and says they might not be mistakes at all, but reflections of a different astronomical reality.
So it wasn't just their lives that were disrupted. Their whole understanding of time was thrown off, too.
Exactly. He also connects these calendar changes to the reign of King Hezekiah in Judah, who apparently made some calendar reforms, and mentions the different calendar systems that were used in ancient Israel. It's a really complex topic, but his point is that these changes to calendars weren't arbitrary. They were responses to real astronomical events.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like they were trying to recalibrate their understanding of time itself.
Exactly. And speaking of astronomer, Velikovsky also delves into ancient observations of Venus and Mars.
Right. What did he find there?
Well, he points out that Venus was often described as a new star in ancient texts, suggesting it appeared suddenly and brightly. The Mayans, who were amazing astronomers, tracked Venus's movements very precisely and knew its synodical period, which is about 584 days. But other cultures describe Venus behaving erratically, moving in ways that didn't make sense.
So it wasn't just a regular planet doing its usual thing.
Nope. And then with Mars, Velikovsky talks about its synodical period of about 780 days and how its brightness and apparent size change a lot during its close approaches to Earth. He even mentions the debate about those canals on Mars that people thought they saw.
Oh, yeah, the canals. People thought there might be Martians building them.
Exactly. But of course, we know now that those canals were just an optical illusion.
Right. So Velikovsky is basically saying that ancient skies were a lot more dynamic and unpredictable than we usually imagine.
Absolutely. And he even speculates about the possibility of future cosmic encounters.
Oh, wow. Does he think we're due for another planetary close call?
He acknowledges that, based on what we know now, no planet is going to crash into us anytime soon. But he does point out that there are asteroids out there that could potentially pose a threat.
That's a little unsettling.
Yeah, but it's worth remembering that space is vast and collisions are pretty rare. Velikovsky also talks about the possibility of planet collisions happening over very long periods and uses Pluto's weird orbit as an example of how the solar system isn't completely static and predictable.
So we might not be due for a cosmic encounter anytime soon, but it's not impossible in the grand scheme of things.
Right. And he also has some interesting thoughts about comets based on his whole Venus theory.
Oh, right. Since he thinks Venus was once a comet, his whole theory kind of implies that comets might be younger than we previously thought.
Exactly. He suggests that comets might not be billions of years old, but maybe only a few thousand.
That would be a pretty big shift in our understanding of comets.
It would. And his theory also implies that comets aren't just wispy clouds of gas and dust. They can be quite massive and have a complex composition, like Venus.
Right. It's like a whole new way of looking at comets.
Definitely. And he even speculates about how the energy from these cosmic encounters, maybe in the form of electrical discharges or radiation, could have triggered rapid changes in both living things and non-living matter on Earth.
So, like, evolution on fast forward.
Yeah, something like that. He doesn't go into detail about it in Worlds in Collision, but he says he'll explore those ideas further in a future book.
Intriguing. And he also briefly touches on the shift from polytheism to monotheism in different cultures.
Right. He suggests that the memory of these huge cosmic catastrophes might have played a role in people moving away from worshiping multiple gods, especially those associated with the planets, and towards the idea of a single, all-powerful god who's beyond the realm of the physical cosmos.
So these events might have literally reshaped our spiritual beliefs.
That's what Velikovsky suggests. He also emphasizes the importance of looking at geological, paleontological, and anthropological evidence to get a more complete picture of these past catastrophes.
It's like he's advocating for a more interdisciplinary approach to understanding history and the cosmos.
Exactly. He even addresses the apparent conflict between his theory and the established laws of celestial mechanics, the laws that govern how planets move.
Right, because if planets were really bouncing around like bumper cars, that would kind of break those laws, wouldn't it?
Well, Velikovsky argues that those laws were developed based on observations of a relatively stable solar system. He thinks that in the past, things might have been a lot more chaotic, and that those laws might not fully account for what happened then.
So he's not saying those laws are wrong, just that they might not be the whole story.
Right. And to support his claims, he even looks at some pretty unexpected evidence. Ancient clocks.
Wait, clocks? Really?
Yeah, he looks at Egyptian sundials and water clocks and suggests that their designs might actually reflect a different tilt of Earth's axis and a different length of day in the past.
So like ancient timekeeping devices as evidence of cosmic upheaval.
Exactly. He points to a specific shadow clock found in Fayum, Egypt, and a water clock from the time of Amenhotep III that seem to have weird timescales. He also mentions the possibility of the Earth's poles having shifted in the past, citing ancient Brahmin sky charts that show a different location for the North Pole.
It's amazing how he finds potential evidence in the most unexpected places.
It is. He even suggests that Siberia and Alaska might have been habitable and even home to advanced civilizations before those catastrophes in the 8th and 7th centuries BC changed Earth's climate. And he brings back that 360-day year that was so common in ancient cultures, suggesting that it might be a relic of a time when Earth's orbit was different.
Wow. It's clear that Velikovsky really thought outside the box. Whether you agree with his theories or not, you have to admit that he was a brilliant and incredibly thorough researcher.
Absolutely. He was a true visionary, bringing together evidence from so many different fields to paint this really dramatic and thought-provoking picture of our cosmic past.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into worlds in collision, it's clear that Velikovsky's ideas are still incredibly relevant today. They force us to question what we think we know about history, mythology, and even the very nature of our solar system.
Exactly. And they highlight the importance of staying open to new ideas, even if they seem crazy at first.
And that brings us to our final thought for you, our amazing listeners. If Velikovsky is even partially right, if these cosmic catastrophes did happen and humanity repressed the memory of them, could that collective amnesia still be shaping our behavior and our understanding of the universe today?
That's a really powerful question and something to really ponder.
It is. It makes you wonder how much of our past, both individually and collectively, is still influencing us in ways we don't even realize.
Absolutely. Okay, before we go, we have a great question from one of our listeners. They ask, according to Velikovsky, which specific parts of the Bible are most important in telling the story of these catastrophic events?
That's a fantastic question and one we touched on a bit earlier.
Yeah. Velikovsky really focuses on the book of Exodus, particularly the plagues of Egypt. Some of the key passages he mentions include the Nile turning to blood, the plague of hail and fire, the 3 days of darkness, and the parting of the Red Sea. He also draws on Psalms that talk about earthquakes and chaos in the heavens, and the story in Joshua about the sun and moon standing still.
Right. And he connects those biblical accounts to similar stories from other cultures around the world.
Exactly. He sees them as evidence of a global event, not just a local or isolated one.
Well, there you have it. A glimpse into the mind-blowing world of worlds in collision. Huge thanks to our listener for that awesome question. If any of you have more questions or thoughts about this book or any other books you'd like us to deep dive into, please let us know.
Yeah, we love hearing from you guys.
And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share this with your friends. We'll see you in our next deep dive. Keep reading, keep exploring, and keep those questions coming.